Well, welcome back, everyone. This is the Trampled Underfoot podcast show on YouTube. You can find us at Trampled Underfoot Podcast on YouTube, as well as other places such as Facebook under the same name, and we have a website as well. So, what's going on, Mark?
Man, just I'm trying to get ahead on the C word that's coming up next month. I
Ooh.
don't like to talk about it in November because I think what we need to do is we need to remember that November is turkey month and the fat man has to wait until December. That's his month.
Hmm.
And we need to end this illegal occupation of November by Christmas by just not bringing it up. So I just said it. I know I just said it, but that's it.
Well, don't worry. The way the economy is going, there'll be no Christmas.
Well, no, I don't believe that for a minute, but I'm getting ready for it. I'm making some gifts and what have you. I've got a head start, so it's things are going well. And then just this is the one thing I'm sure everybody that makes things hates, and that is waiting for stuff. You
Mhm.
know, if you're not waiting for parts or supplies, you're waiting on things that are just completely and totally out of your reach, out of your control. Right now, I'm waiting on glue to cure. And what I want to do won't take long, but I can't do it while it's in clamps and the glue is wet. So,
Hmm.
I hate waiting on stuff. But what can you say? You got to learn patience. Sit down, shut up, relax, Mark. It's only been 61 years you've been working on this. Knock it off.
So
So,
let me see. So, well, I can share this. So I'm doing a follow up. Well, not a follow up. I'm doing a video, but I got interrupted
mhm,
by a friend in a group where he was mentioning some things on a post that I had made about genealogy and such and this and that.
mhm.
But I've been working on it and I put it on pause, and actually it's been on pause. Like I had everything, but he derailed me, and I wanted to share. Um, in I guess you'd say that area of Eastern Europe where I guess you'd say Hungary and all those other like Serbia and
Mhm.
Croatia, just that area. Like in the Bronze Age and in throughout the Bronze Age, there were little tribes of people that lived there,
Mhm.
and I started to study it because I have a match with I have a match with a lot of those,
Mhm.
right? So I said, well, let me, and I thought for a good video series, but it's harder than I expected. I could take all those matches I have because I'm not the only one that matches that. There's people
Sure.
around the world that, and I'm gonna give them like a background on it and put it up and do a series of those for people to facilitate the background because the site doesn't give extensive background on
Sure.
these matches, these ancient matches and stuff. So this one match, um, I'll pull it up if I can here. Let me see if I can pull it up. This one match is from a group of people that if I could remember right now, the actual here it is. Because it's been like over 2 weeks since I started, and then I stopped messing with it. So the match is not on my little thing here. Okay, so
Nah.
the match is okay. Here it is. So it's a Bronze Age Serbian match from 1950 BC.
Mhm.
That ancient person that died that long
Mhm.
ago transmitted into the future
Mhm.
his DNA, and that spread around the world and whatnot. And then people, depending on where those ancestors of that person spread out,
Yeah.
those people would have um, received or have been donated that same DNA in a
Right.
huge puzzle and stuff. And so I share. a fair amount with like enough so that it registers with that Serbian
Mm-hmm.
match. So I went and started looking into the history of it. And the thing about the history of these people is that they come from a civilization called the Moros civilization. And they were a Bronze Age civilization that were dabbling in all sorts of like foundry, like they were making metals and whatnot.
Yeah.
Well, the Bronze Age. So, but and they wore like beads and headgear, and they've dug out all this stuff. And they were like small, like I guess you'd call them like villages or something, or like little clans.
Mm-hmm.
And they had a very screwed up, or they had a very, like, I've been reading the actual papers
Mm-hmm.
for the video. They lived a pretty brutal, like I was reading it and I was like, holy. So the men in this particular, they found a bunch of graves, right, next to a river, close to the Danube River,
Yeah.
but not that close, but it's in that Serbian area, whatever. And they found all sorts of stuff. They lived. So the men in those little tribes or villages, most of them didn't make it out of their first year.
Mm-hmm.
And then within the first 15 years, a lot of them died. The ones that made it past 15 would then go on and survive. However, the ones that were dead, the men that had died past 15, was in many cases due to battles, like blunt attacks and such and stuff. So they've studied all this. So just right off the bat, that doesn't sound good. And then the men that reached their 40s, that would have been considered an old man.
Yeah.
Well, according to their studies and this and that, and there's a lot of papers. I've read a lot of it. I'm not going to speak it as technical as what I've read. I'm just giving you the roundabout sort of thing. The men that did survive, they say that they continued to work even throughout old age. They never stopped working. As far as farming and whatnot, which is what they would do. Well, they never stopped working. And the signs of that is seen in their body, plus their diets and all this and that. For the women, as they aged, they grew in power, in social standing. And the reason they can trace that is due to the grave goods and whereas men, not so much. And so there's this whole story with the thing. And it's interesting. This particular guy that I matched with belonged to a greater civilization of independent little clans.
Mm-hmm. And tribes, villages, yeah.
Like villages, tribes. They would raid each other for goods and for power and glory and such. And so, some tribes would overpower. There was the taking of women and the whole, the whole brutalness of it. So as I went and studied it, and there are pictures I'm going to do the video eventually. It's eye-opening to see that, and the fact of me connecting to it. So anyways, to wrap this up and see what you think, the astounding thing is that in my consideration, I'm thinking of myself as a Spanish person. Right. I'm thinking of myself with a history of the Iberian Peninsula. I'm thinking of myself in the context of that when I think of history or where my ancestors would have been. But before the time that people were in the Iberian Peninsula, they arrived from somewhere else prior to that, through the long history of like humans spreading out and whatnot. And so a lot of like Spanish people that are derived of Iberian people, have a huge chunk of their ancestors coming from, or that DNA coming from that Eastern, that Serbian, that Montenegro, even down into the Balkans. It's very that. So I found it very interesting.
So down into Serbia and Montenegro?
Hungary, Serbia, Montenegro,
okay.
All that sort of extreme southern to the east, southern and eastern Europe.
Yeah. Well,
and going back in time.
The reason I'm asking is because when my father got his DNA analysis done, they looked for ancient DNA as well, and traced back my father's side back to Macedonia,
Hmm.
which, if you look on the map,
It's about there.
they share a border with Serbia.
Yeah.
So, um, I mean, we've made jokes about cousin Eloy before. I mean, God knows. I need to get that done. That's all there is to it, and take some more of these deeper dives into it, because I can't get into my father's records. I don't have his passwords or anything. So,
Yeah.
I mean, I have them, but it's all password protected, because why wouldn't it be?
Of
But
course.
I've got to get that done myself. So it was strange to me to hear you bring up Serbia, because I have ancient connections back in Macedonia.
It's
So,
but the thing is that these people would have spread out, and they did, of course.
mhm.
I mean, I wouldn't have I wouldn't have known that if I wouldn't have obviously gotten into studying all this. Because why would I look up anything to do with Serbia?
Yeah, yeah,
I mean, frankly,
yeah.
um, and that's just the first one. I got stuck on that one because there's so much information, like
Hmm.
little beads. They would find shape like bones, so that
Hmm.
they would be pins that they could attach their garments with.
Yeah.
um and the reason they know that is because they were found on garments, like in the
Hmm.
resting place of the person. And just a series of intricate things that they found just by doing the archaeology of it. But then they have the DNA extraction, and what it is that you have your original you had your original hunter gatherer communities, or no matter whatever they were, out across Europe. And these people are very ancient, right? Like there's no,
Yeah.
but then you have these people that came from the east that were like the agricultural advance, and
Hmm.
those people then mixed with these other hunter gatherer previous people. I'm sure
Well,
there was battles, but I'm sure there was, there was mixing, but I'm also sure that there was battles as opposed to just lovey dovey. I'm
well,
sure it was a complicated experience, but
not only that, but there was also, you have to remember, slavery involved in that too. I mean, the Romans took a lot of slaves. A lot of civilizations took a lot of slaves, and it was
yeah.
basically before the technology or the money existed to go to another continent to get slaves. You know, stronger tribes took weaker tribes as slaves, and slaves could be sold anywhere. I mean,
Yeah, well, in this
Eastern
scenario,
slaves got spread all over Western Europe.
but like with this particular scenario, this is like way pre any eventually the Romans um would come into play, but
Sure,
this is
but
like freaking ancient stuff.
oh yeah, but you have several empires that came along, Babylonian empires and Hittites, and I mean,
Yeah.
you name it. There were, I mean, you had an empire a month, just about.
Hmm.
So, I mean, gosh, it was
Yeah.
crazy.
So these people at some point
Hmm.
would have made their, so obviously it's more complicated, but just the idea of people
Hmm.
that you're made up of like endless amounts of um
Right.
pieces of people
Hmm.
from the past, and that's forwarded into the, but to think of a place like Eastern Europe or Serbia today is difficult to think of. But it's also difficult to think of it in terms of like ancient, because we don't have any way to we can't, we like you one could not document properly past the 1500s. Maybe you could get into the 1400s, but for any reasonable person doing studies, anything past like the 1500s, and that's
Yeah.
stretching it, is, so imagine something Bronze Age. The only reason we can
Yeah.
even talk about it is because of this DNA study. I just found the life of these
Yeah.
people that eventually would produce me in a complicated spider's web. What would produce all of us? Because those people, it's so long ago that those are the one group of the fathers of all of us, mostly.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's the important point to remember is that we are the descendants of the survivors or
Yeah,
the victors.
yeah,
You know, I mean, now
yeah,
there may be, I mean, and that's why I brought up like the Romans and various different the slave trade and what have you. But
yeah,
it's people say, well, how could they spread from Serbia or from Macedonia all the way to Western Europe? I mean, there's nothing says they did it because they wanted to. I mean, people were moved all over the place quite against their will. I mean,
yeah,
both because of the slave trade and because of just natural and man-made disasters. I mean, if your village is set on fire, you got to go somewhere. And the instinct is going to be to get as far away from the people who lit the match as you possibly can. So, I mean, human migration happens for many, many, many reasons, and it still does to this day.
mhm,
So,
yeah.
Lord only knows when that migration happened and why. I mean, that's open to speculation. We can only speculate as to why these people left where they left from.
There were many events.
Oh, God save us, yes.
Yeah, like we
But
can't, we wouldn't like there must have been, and there are studies, but there must have been many, because if you think of us living for the 100 years we live,
mhm,
look at all the movement that people. I know, obviously, we have cars and whatnot and this and that, but
sure.
100 years is like is it is a long time, and people can move around. So imagine thousands of years or whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's like it's enough time for a lot of stuff to happen. But one thing that is, I'll bring this up. One thing that is very interesting and curious. All the whoever those people were that came over to Western Europe.
Mhm,
So here's the funny thing. So, or not funny, but it's interesting. And this is like, this is not speculative.
mhm.
This is actually shown in not only archaeology, but it's shown, and there's plenty of papers. Like it's free to even look at the papers from the people that do this for a living, and there's so it's a solid thing. Although I'm not going to be very nuanced with it. Um, all the men. So you and I, let's say,
Mhm.
with a recent, roughly within 100, 200, whatever the time frame, recent Western Europe, anywhere from Spain to just Western Europe.
Mhm.
All the men that were there that were original from there,
Mhm.
we are not descended from them. None of us are, because there came a group that took out, either by hook or crook. Some say that there was some killing, others say it was just a preference of there's a million things, but what did show is that from one point, at one moment, the men had a certain blood group,
Mhm.
haplogroup, DNA group,
Right.
and after a day, over 90% of that DNA disappeared. The women stayed.
Mhm.
So we have the ancient, in a general sense, of the
Mhm.
women that would have been in their respective areas, although they moved around a lot because of what you said,
Well,
taking of women. Well, let me finish, because listen, all those original men. There are still some that are so rare,
yeah.
so you will find rare ones.
Well,
But
I've
the
got
most,
one of those rare ones. Yeah.
but the most overwhelming
Mhm.
um, haplogroup in Western Europe is that R.
Mhm.
It's not the only one, because
No.
R1A and others were dominant in that group that came out and basically took over. But we are all the sons,
Mhm.
literally. And it doesn't even matter if you, like, let's say, I'll say this, although this might be controversial. Well, I'm not going to say it. I'll leave it to the side, because it's bringing in a whole different. But we are the descendants of people that replaced the
Mhm.
original inhabitants of Western Europe.
You are. I'm not. I'm still one of those rare haplogroups. So you're R1, right?
I'm R1B something something something.
I'm I2A.
But that is
I
also that is
I
also actually,
I
we'd have to look at it to see.
I have looked at it. That's that area down in Macedon, and let's see. um, not Macedon, excuse me. Macedonia and
Macedonia.
parts of Albania and a little bit of Bulgaria, but not quite down into northern Greece.
Okay.
That's where that haplogroup originates.
Yeah, I don't know about that. I know we did sit and talk about it and look
Mhm.
into it one day. So, but obviously I'm stuck with R1 because that's what I'm studying because I'm
Right,
related to it,
right.
literally. But um, see, I can't even say. I want to say that isn't it also found in the Nordic countries like
Oh, it
there
is now, but it's still not very common.
it isn't a common
No,
haplogroup.
yeah, it's not very common at all.
Yeah, but there's no but so this is a little bit going off, but there's no way that you would not so well not there's not that I would bet
Mhm.
according to all that I've read, but I don't know specifically, so it's not like I think but I would bet that it only makes sense, although I could be wrong, that your father's father going back in time would have had to have been because they didn't just have that one haplogroup, it just happened to propagate. The R1B
Mhm.
just happened to propagate, and R1A went to Eastern
Right.
Europe. But yours had to have come from those people as well, because I can't fathom that whatever the original, you have to have high.
Well,
Um,
that's where this haplogroup originated. That's all they will. That's all they can say. It's not been found earlier than in that area. I mean, it's been found all over Western Europe, going back their ancient DNA studies. It has been found,
yeah,
but the earliest origin of it, the earliest examples of it, are in Macedonia.
and what was it before that?
That's what I mean. They can't find it before that. They haven't found it. They haven't found anything earlier than that. So
No,
their
but you
theory, the current theory, is that it originated there in Macedonia.
okay, all right. Well, all the so your haplogroup. I mean, according to the thing,
Hmm.
bef- it becomes that, but prior to that,
Hmm.
it's something else, and something else, and something else, and then it goes back inevitably into so R1B, the origin of R1B,
Hmm.
its origin traces back straight to Africa, flat
No,
out,
I'm sure. I'm sure. I2A eventually winds its way back there as well.
right?
But
But like
right,
all
but as it sits right now, currently, with the ancient DNA that they have found so far, that's the earliest that they can find is in Macedonia, and there is quite a concentration of it.
well, in any event, speaking of R1B, um, overwhelmingly most of Western Europe
Hmm.
from the top to just completely right
Hmm.
it traces back now some people argue that's kind of like what some of the commenters in my video said because that was kind of what we were is that they would have gone there would have been the spread of the R1B and then some would have branched back into Africa.
Hmm.
So there's a theory that people say that no what happened was that the R1B spread to Western Europe, but other branches of it just as might as well just have gone back into Africa. And I'm sure something like that could have happened, but the idea is that it branches from Africa, evolves, and then goes into Western Europe, and then it propagates to the point that it does. But all haplogroups branch into one. The tree just simply roots
Hmm.
back into that one. So by hook or crook, before it becomes an R, becomes a J, or whatever, it goes back to that common origin. But anyways, the cool thing is, the interesting is that we wouldn't know any of this if not for like what these people that do such things do, because all we have is at best that 1500s, maybe if we can even get there, that sort of 1500s timeline of paper trail. Because prior to that, there
Yeah.
was nothing. So I found it cool. I found it cool, well enough to make a video, and the lifestyle that those people back then would have lived.
It was a brutal life from the sounds of it. I mean, it sounds to me like it was just the strongest male survived, and that was it. And
Yeah,
you couldn't, if you couldn't take it, you were, from the sounds of it, more or less beaten to death.
yeah. I
And
don't know how I
then
could have made it without internet and all the
internet hell. How about a shield? Get me something other than this rock.
But I mean, it's like, yeah, it's like, boy, I mean, so how? Okay, so like, kind of veering off. It's kind of a theme with me, or with us actually. But I'm gonna say it in light of looking at things like that. Well, you just said it, right? How about at least a shield? It's hard for one not to be sort of slightly appreciative of the fact that we are where we're at in comparison. Because I mean, it's not that bad being able to go to your local supermarket
Mhm.
instead of hunting down like elk and stuff.
Yeah. Oh yeah. I mean, but see, that's the thing. It's there's a Australian comedian by the name of Tim Minchin, and he did a. I mentioned it before. He did a speech at his alma mater. He was given an honorary doctorate, and he gave a speech. It was a commencement, and he was telling the graduating class. He gave his 9 rules for life, and one of them was remember it's 100% luck. Just you being here and being alive is 100% luck. Because when you think about the physiology, it could have been any one of hundreds of millions of seeds that grew to be you. So it's 100% luck, you know? And if you treat it that way and think of it that way, your day will go a hell of a lot smoother. We
Yeah.
are very lucky to be living in the time we are. Would you like to go back to the 7th century? No. No, I wouldn't. Would you like to go back to the 1800s? No. No, I wouldn't. I mean, I have too many headaches and aspirin wasn't invented yet. Yes, I'm spoiled. I'm a 20th century guy. I know we're in the 21st century, but I grew up in the 20th. I like my modern conveniences.
Yeah.
You think we would go nuts without internet? How about anything? How about sitting in a cabin with a fireplace? And that's your entertainment because most of them didn't know how to read. So, you know,
Yeah.
it's no, I like my creature comforts way, way too much to even
Or
contemplate something like
glasses.
that. Yeah.
I mean, just the fact, because if it weren't for this, at this
Mm
point, I could see blurry.
hmm. Mm
So it's over, game over at that point. It's like, so
hmm.
just, it's like,
We talk about modern technology a lot, and I know that, but we sometimes forget about some of the wonders that we have. And you just mentioned it, glasses. When glasses were developed, um, it was a complete and total revolution. I mean,
it's hundreds of years old, by the way.
yes, authors and professors, scholars, it extended their career for decades. They could continue on with their work, doctors, scientists, all because as you get older, your eyesight gets weaker. Well, now there's a way to correct for it. I can keep reading, I can keep writing, I can keep researching. So I don't know. I can't I can't prove it, and I know I keep saying it over and over. Correlation does not imply causation. But when you look at the progress that was made culturally, scientifically, and just I mean, it whether it be the written word, the arts, music, playwrights, uh, or science, medicine, most of that came after the advent of eyeglasses. not all of it. But after the invention of eyeglasses and the propagation of eyeglasses, it started coming at a much, much faster pace. I mean, when you stop and think about it, from about the 1700s, that period to the 1900s, no other period saw as much technology develop in that 200-year period. No other period in human history saw technology develop that fast, and that much progress come through. I mean, the advances in agriculture, in raising cattle and what have you, and medicine and the sciences, flight, space travel, all of that happened in a span of about 200 to 250 years after the propagation of eyeglasses.
It extends our ability to do work.
Yeah. And smart people who have spent their youth developing those skills and doing that research were able to continue that research. You know?
If you think also, it wasn't properly until the, like I said earlier, the 1500s, where things like putting family names down and births and such,
Mhm.
um, which later became a tool for, well, genealogy as an example, um, that kind of started rolling out. It was through the church and the
Right.
state. Like in Spain, the state did not do any of that until, if I'm not mistaken, for proper documentation, until the 18. There's no records earlier from the state,
Mhm.
of birth or whatnot,
Well,
before 1870.
let me
So
ask you a question. Was there a Spanish state? Was there a Spain
no. Well, what
back
what in
then?
the 1870s?
Yeah,
Yeah, there
it
was.
was Spain. Okay, all right, all right.
Yeah, it was Spain. It was because originally it was little. It was the
It was a
same
bunch
as
of city states. Yes,
it's the same as what happened with England until they got it together. And I think
Mhm.
everybody got it together in the western part of Europe, roughly within the same
Mhm.
timelines. Because there was the church, the Catholic Church, that controlled it all from the religious aspect. So there
Mhm.
was pressure and rules and regulations church-wise, so
Mhm.
that they all would conform to, because they were looking for the graces of the church, until the
Yeah.
the English king said, "I wanted to divorce," and that whole story. But um, in 1492, from that point on, at during 1492, prior,
Mhm.
there was no unification. It
Right.
was after 1492, and that's once they won over from the Moors.
Right.
Um, they took over the last bastion of control in the peninsula, over from the Moors, or Arabs, because they were both, they were
Right.
um, then they had it all, and then they sent Columbus, or Columbus came to them and said, "Please, could you fund me?" And so they did. It was at that point that the empire started to become an empire,
Okay.
because once Columbus did what he did, then it expanded and stuff. But before that, the church, local little villages and whatnot, would
Right.
record birth, baptisms, marriages,
Mhm.
and those were the three papers. And the only way you could trace back ancestors in the legal sense, because they didn't record until about 1870, the state never recorded those births or deaths.
Mhm.
They started doing that from 1870 on, roughly there.
Mhm.
What they did have was, like, I guess, lawsuits,
Right.
wills, um, payment, between men and things like that. So you could look for that kind of stuff.
Mhm.
But as far as so we don't imagine if they had done what they do now, back in the 1400s, 1300s. Dude, we could go
Well,
back. We could go back to, like, a while back.
Well,
That would be freaking cool.
that's why this ancient DNA is so important. That I know it doesn't sound interesting to a lot of people, but that's one of the reasons why this ancient DNA is so important, is because if I follow the documentation, I can make it back into the 1700s and that's it.
Yeah.
But because of this ancient DNA, I can say genetically, I go back way earlier than that
Yeah.
to Lincolnshire in England, then back to Belgium and Luxembourg, and then back further than that to Macedonia. Now, what happened between Macedonia and Luxembourg, I have no clue.
A
But
lot of
that's
stuff.
why yeah, well, obviously, because we're talking about a couple of thousand years there. But um, I that's why I say I've got to get my DNA test done and get going on that so I can find newer matches, because it's been a couple of years.
Yeah. If you think
Been
of
about 5.
if you think of people like, let's say somebody, a family in the 1800s, generally they would have, they could have up to 12, 13 kids, just shoot them out over the course of a
Oh
decade or
yeah.
so.
Yeah, my great grandfather had 13 brothers and sisters.
If you take that concept of that,
Mhm.
and you move it back a generation, um, each time, with parents having these large sets of kids, and each one of those kids having kids of their own to whatever degree they did, some
Yeah.
dying early, whatever the case. But you start to, so the one of the things that I've learned with all this is that if you look at your family tree or mine or anybody watching, um, generally speaking, because there are exceptions, but the tree is literally a tree where you have, like, let's say Mark Lindsay and his siblings, his parents, and then his grandparents and great grandparents, and it looks like a funnel, like a tree.
Mhm.
But um, if you if you if you back away from that and look at the bigger, uh, your tree within the local sphere, and then the broader sphere, it's more like a spider's web, because a lot of those
Oh yeah,
people,
it's all over.
that are in other parts of the spider's web of the human experience actually connect with you in some sort of like roundabout way, and so it's more like a spider. So the human thing is like a spider's web, as opposed to just like some sort of funnel tree. The further out you look, where
Yeah.
everybody starts to connect and whatnot, and
You're
it's
probably only safe in calling it a tree going back about 3 generations, and even then that's questionable. Because by the time we get to my great grandfather, that would be 3 generations. No, my dad, my grandfather, my great grandfather. I'm still safe calling it, yeah, say 4 generations. My great grandfather. From there to me, you could probably call it a tree. But you go any further back than that, and yeah, it's more than a spider's web. It's a whole colony of those son of a guns, because it can go in any direction.
yeah.
Especially with them having that many kids.
Yeah, because they would have kids of their own, and then it would become a huge network of people crisscrossing, and then maybe down the line, a generation or two, a woman and a man that may have had a great uncle,
Mhm.
would then connect again, and so that
Yep.
connection would also be revived, and stuff like that. So it's a huge, and so that's why one of the biggest astounding parts when I did this back in 2018, um,
Mhm.
for me was, and I've been surprised, because there's a lot of baggage that comes along. Like when I did my thing, and you were there for it, and so was Steve. I did it in order to acquire more cousin matches, in order to solve mysteries in my tree that I was trying to solve and whatnot. But I realized that a lot of people, um, their interest is surface interest, and it's a lot of bias in terms of some sort of, like, I guess you would call it, like social political bias. So like if they see that, like I titled my thing Cuban DNA or whatnot,
Mhm.
um, I explain in the video, well, no, I was born here, but I'm calling it Cuban DNA because my parents were Cuban. But then again, they descend from people that weren't Cuban. It goes back to, and I tried to explain that in the video, but felt that the title was appropriate. Well, some people don't like Cubans because of whatever current or within the last 50, 60 years, politically, they may not like them because they go against the fray in certain aspects and this and that. And so they take that to heart and they'll come up at you and say some nasty thing or some, and I started to see all these, and they expect you to be a thing, right? So they expected a Cuban to be, and by the way, I don't it's weird. I was talking with my aunt about this. Like, I might as well say it and share it, although we've talked a little bit about it before. Just because my folks were Cuban, all it means is that they were born in a place that's a nation called Cuba. It doesn't mean that they have a genetic unless they have indigenous Cuban roots, right? It doesn't mean anything. It just means that but the experience of people is to take the island, and due to its political and the people, how they shifted politically, and some people favor certain ideas as opposed to others, and so they use you as a stepping stone to attack you as an individual. What I'm doing is trying to find my story, and they attach this whole 60 years of political unrest and problems on you.
Welcome to the internet, my friend. Welcome to the internet. It's a rough neighborhood. Wear a cup. I mean, my first week on Twitter, I saw a tweet from somebody. I don't remember who it was. I was kind of exploring and just seeing what the landscape was. I didn't know anything about Twitter. So I'm just kind of, oh, here's somebody, and I'll click on it and I'll read through their stuff. And it was a guy who said, there's nothing better than spending a nice, quiet Saturday morning on the front porch drinking coffee with my wife. Pretty vanilla.
Benign. Yeah.
Very. And like 4 comments down on that tweet is, oh, what a privileged position to be in. There are people starving and dying in Yemen.
Yeah.
And I thought, what? Number one, why do you have to be so mean about it to this person you don't even know? And number two, the hell do you care? If there are people starving and dying in Yemen, go do something about it. Why are you picking on some dude sitting on his porch drinking coffee with his wife? So my point in all of that is to say, the internet's not a good place. The technology of the internet is great. Watching YouTube videos, I went back, I'll say it right here, loud and proud. We went back the other night, Linda and I, and we were watching George of the Jungle and Super Chicken cartoons for about an hour and a half. And I'm laughing my butt off. She's sitting there rolling her eyes at me because she thought the jokes were dumb. I thought they were brilliant. But I'm a big 5-year-old. That's the difference between men and women. Let me just put that out there too. Little girls grow up to be women. Little boys grow up to be old little boys. And that's just it. So, yeah, I want to watch Super Chicken. But I like that part of the technology. But as far as about half of the people using that technology, I got nothing to say to them. I got nothing to say. I just don't care.
Yeah, I found it so in the context of people extrapolated my present. If you go back and watch that video of me sharing my discovery of I'm not being braggadocious of whatever my particular results are.
You didn't have to be.
I'm not. But no. But I'm saying I'm saying I wasn't, and I was honest to goodness sharing my. I thought that this, and it has helped a lot of people because a lot of people come and say, "Oh, thank you. You know, that's cool. I want to do my test and stuff." So but I would get responses of like, "Oh well, you're so by your judging by your result. Check this out. Judging by your, I'm paraphrasing, but it was kind of like right like that. Judging by your results, so you're the colonizers then, the ones that killed all these people. Like, um, I'm just one person sharing my stuff,
Mm-hmm.
and they're attributing the whole history of frickin' conquest and rebellion and pitchforks and torches
Mm-hmm.
onto me. I'm saying, you know, so
Yeah, 600 years ago.
in a way, this whole thing has also taught me something, and I'll share it. You know, I was thinking of doing a video. It's so complicated and convoluted, but I'll share it just on the fly. And who the hell is gonna? Um, that's why I've come to a conclusion I've been using for a while now, which is the conclusion of, and I try to apply it as everywhere I can because I think it's very powerful. It might be obvious and dumb, but for me, it was an epiphany, and it's the idea of categories. I am a category of me.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm one human being.
Mm-hmm.
That category of me you can extrapolate and say Eloy in Sweetwater,
Mm-hmm.
Eloy in Dade County, Eloy in Florida, uh, Eloy of Cuban parents, and you
Mm-hmm.
can extrapolate from that, like some friends of ours have done, and I tried to explain, but to no avail. And it could go either way. Um, Eloy American,
Mm-hmm.
or you could say Eloy Cuban American, which is adding something, right,
Mm-hmm.
that I personally don't associate with. But and the reason why, it's not because of a disregard. It's like growing up, my father said, you know, you're American, I'm Cuban, and grandfather is from Spain.
Mm-hmm.
That was the thing. He never attached to me, you know, and that's how he grew. Because
Okay.
in reality, I'm American, and in
Uh-huh.
reality, he was Cuban, and in
And
reality, his father was from Spain. And so you could continue to extrapolate and grow the category bigger until
mm-hmm.
you fit my category in the category of the Spanish world, whatever category, it gets bigger and bigger. People jump categories in terms of assigning other people all sorts of attributes,
Oh
background,
yeah.
personality stuff, all sorts of things that have nothing to do with one human being.
Mm-hmm.
But you're gonna have to take all that junk. So
Oh, well, see,
I didn't invent the wheel.
no.
I didn't sail on the ship with Columbus.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't found the first tobacco businesses across the Caribbean.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't do none of that. Now I can argue my ancestors or the group in the past that led up to me
Mm-hmm.
did said things to one degree or the other in a broad sense, but I couldn't tell you. Well, yes,
Well,
Prince Philip III directly, and therefore I'm culpable of the. And so I've learned that concept, that you can't attribute the individual. You get the point.
you're taught that when you're 7 years old, though. You're taught that as a young kid. Some
Well,
people
yeah,
are not
yeah,
taught that, but you're
it's
supposed to
obvious.
be taught that when you're a little kid.
Yeah,
Personally, you put a lot more thought into those people than I do, because my response is I see something like that, I go, yeah, okay, whatever, flake. It's real easy to make that statement when you're sitting in your apartment in Chesapeake, you know, never mind, what your house displaced. Ban, delete, next.
yeah.
I
Well,
don't I don't even give them the attention, and I don't even leave their comments up to get attention, because I have no time for
yeah.
closed-minded people like that who
No,
have an agenda.
I understand. I'm just saying that
Mhm.
the idea. Okay, so I know it's a simple concept because it's
Mhm.
like kids um, playing with a toy or two toys, right? When you're kids, you
Mhm.
know that one is your toy and the other one is the other kid's toy. Stuff
Mhm.
like or ice cream or whatever. You know that you don't take from others, and you know all these
Right.
rules. So I know it's basic, but it's so basic, and yet people don't apply it properly. Not everybody, but a lot of people don't apply it,
Right.
and they don't apply it not only in this category that we're talking about. They don't apply the category thing of you're responsible for your own actions. You can't extrapolate that now you're culpable of the actions of a whole group of people. It's kind of like that Kanye West guy where a whole he attributed guilt um to a whole group
Right.
by saying, "Oh, it's because of that so and so record exec or whatever." What he did there. So, two things about that. That's something that's very basic, but this is now jumping ship from what we were talking about slightly. Um, are you telling me, talking about him, that you're impugning attitudes? And I know it's easy to do. It's easier to say, you know what, those people over there, how dare they? They're all a bunch of scumbags and this and that. I mean,
Sure.
I get it, but in a reason, if you use your higher level of reasoning, are you trying to say that millions of people across the world in that particular group that he was pointing out, not all of them are rich, most of them are struggling, and most of them are normal people going to work, family issues, moving, and some issue here and there, like any other human being, and you're calling a group out in the way that you did with your position of power and reach, and then I saw people starting to attack that group in a very like online, but
Yeah.
that's not the point. The point is that there's people out there that will take a cue from that
Hmm.
and go out and they'll see an old lady walking across. We saw that with the burning fires and whatnot from a
Oh
year and a
yeah.
half ago. You
Oh yeah.
know, oh, you're under
Oh
the
yeah.
category, under the broad category of white people.
Well, they are weak-minded, shallow, little people trying to make themselves feel better and feel bigger than they actually are. And that's why I don't give them the time of day. They don't get that. I don't let them rent space in my head. I don't let them have anything except the delete and block. That's all they get. You know, you don't have to go home, but you can't play here. Gone. Goodbye. I have no time for people like that because it's nothing but a weak, hatred filled mind. And I refuse to allow that kind of poison that close to me.
There's a lot of laziness also
There
because we
is.
we follow we so a lot of the things that we know and act on, and it doesn't have to be something aggressive or abrasive, it's just in a general sense, we do it on automatic. We develop reflexes in our habits, not only physically, but our mental. Like for instance, today I was out and about in town, and this person was slowing down so bad, and automatically I'm like, this freaking guy, he's freaking like, go forward, dude. And and the guy next to me was doing the same thing but slightly worse, and so they were making it so that it's basically like I wasn't on the autobahn and doing some sort of race. I couldn't get around these stupid idiots, and so
Mhm.
I'm pissed off and stuff. But um, I'm the observer, and I'm looking at these people from my vantage point. Who knows if that person in the car has the craps, or his foot is damaged,
Or he's lost
or
or just old or, yeah.
exactly. But I'm obviously first
Hmm.
because I'm the observer of
Hmm.
myself out towards the world. So I'm making
Oh, yeah.
judgment calls. So we all have all these judgment calls.
Sure. Hit
I
all the
don't,
pedals. One of them's the gas.
right. So I'm not okay. So here's the point of why I'm saying this. I don't begrudge people for the human reaction in a situation, this and that. I mean, well, it's if I were to like do some drastic thing, that's now. But generally getting grumpy or angry or making an assumption about something or someone, That's one thing. But to be perpetually stuck in that mode of assumption when you've been presented more clarification and you refuse to open the gates in the brain to at least entertain concepts, and you're perpetually wanting to double down on something that someone is offering you, hey, well, look, here's some clarity. I find that,
Yeah,
you know
that's what I mean. Narrow-minded, weak-minded, hate-filled people.
yeah,
And these are the same people who are going to be surprised that when they die lonely, bitter, old people because they've alienated their families, they've alienated everybody around them, and nobody can stand to be with them. My advice is start investing in cat litter now because something tells me you're going to go through a lot of it. And it'll never be cheaper than it is today. So invest in cat litter now.
yeah. There's a lot of people also, and like you said, once you put yourself out there in the world, but you know whatever. In the context of
Yeah.
what we were talking about earlier, I was just saying that I couldn't help. I guess I'll wrap my bit up with this and see what you say. It, so I had no understanding of the complexity of, and by the way, I'm not saying that I do have more understanding now, but I'm
Mm-hmm.
not saying that I'm this all knowledge. None of that.
Scientist, yeah.
I'm not saying none of that. I'm just, I'm a novice or backseat, curious but once presented with that 2018 test,
Mm-hmm.
which I opened in front of you and Steve that day, and we were all amazed. I was like, "What?" And then, what? Huh? Because it's who would think all these things like Portugal? I would not have considered
French?
as a thing. French, I would not. It didn't even cross
French
my.
French freaked you out. You're like, where'd this come from?
Yeah, it freaked me out because it makes no sense to me. But I didn't understand. There was a lot I didn't understand, and
Right.
since then, now I understand a lot of things much more clear,
Mhm.
significantly clearer.
Uh-huh.
And I can't help to. I don't know anybody that would sit and sit with it, and learn a little bit, not to come to a similar conclusion as mine. And mainly, even with the what do you call it, the cousin matches.
Mhm.
If you have cousins anywhere from frickin', because and I do, anywhere from Germany to frickin' Norway, if you have cousins, in other words, you're sharing DNA. Like, there's no way around it. There's no supposing. There's no tricks. It's not a Las Vegas magic act. It's
Mhm.
it's that's shared percentage combination of letters that denote a connection, a common ancestor at some point. Of
Mhm.
course, some it's earlier, some it's longer, whatever.
Right.
But if you have all these people from all these different places that are sharing DNA, that means that someone back in the day, a bunch of people back in the day, spread their seeds, and their seeds spread out in different directions, and continue to. And so the spider's web analogy
Mhm.
um, comes into play, and you can't help but understand that. Oh wow! So this is a huge spider's web that's going on here, and it changes your way of thinking. Because before, I really didn't think about that. Okay, we're Spanish. Grandfather was from Spain. My Canary Islands for my mom, Malaga for this, and that's our story, and that's as far as you understand, or even because what
Sure.
what else is there? But after this, now oh wow, the possibilities. But people that do this are hung up in some sort of colonial era, sort of like, oh well,
Well, that's what I
you know,
keep saying. It depends on how far back you want to go and where you want to stop. If
yeah,
you are, if you got your family tree traced back to Spain and decided that was good enough for you, none of this would be of any importance to you. Okay,
no,
I've confirmed grandma and grandpa are from Spain. Good enough for me. And that's it.
yeah,
None of this other stuff would be of any consequence to you. Well, you have a good percentage of the population, and you run into these people all the time on Ancestry and FDDNA and all these various other sites
Yeah.
who take the test and never fill out a tree, but they have a test result.
No, and
And
worse, and worse. They have
and
assumptions that they go on and
Mhm,
propagate the assumptions as if they know what the hell they're talking about. And of
mhm,
course, again, the rule applies that I mentioned earlier. You can be under false assumptions,
mhm.
but once you're offered the silver plate with extra stuff on it, and you don't take it because no, I'm right, I don't want to see that, then you're just doubling down on your preference for the reality which you want to, and you're perfectly all right to do that. But if you're going to propagate it, expect people to say no, you're freaking wrong. So that's one of the
Yeah,
issues with these people.
yeah. And like I said, narrow-minded people full of hate.
Yeah.
Dan Harju has a comment on that. We're all related via the survivors of the media-induced global catastrophe of 12,600 years ago. Sup, cuz? Yeah, yeah. I mean, so the global catastrophe of 12,600 years ago, that was the last ice age, right?
I guess I don't know what he's talking. I
Maybe
think
in North America. I don't know.
no, he was mentioning something about Joe Rogan a few days ago. I couldn't watch it. I couldn't listen to it because it's on Spotify and I don't have an account with them. I couldn't listen to it. But
Okay.
there are theories of like
The
the
ice
world.
age. Yes, the ice age.
There are theories of the world that it like came like civilization crashed, and there's evidence for that, and there's a name for it, and there's people that study it. It's called the Bronze Age collapse.
Collapse. Yeah.
But that happened about 8,000 to 9,000 years ago,
Yeah.
roughly. I think
Yeah. Thereabouts.
they don't
Um,
know what happened, but they know there was mass.
well,
What do you call it? Famine, and writing and such collapsed. Like there was no. So there's a bunch of things there.
yeah.
Yeah.
And that it's that kind of thing is cyclical. I mean,
Let's
that
hope
it has
not.
happened. Well, no, it has happened before, and it may happen again. You never know. I mean, who's to say? But it has happened before several times over the course of history. I mean, not mass extinctions or anything like that, although that has happened in the past. I mean, I think the last mass extinction was the dinosaurs. I may be wrong, but I don't think there's been one since. Not worldwide anyway. But
There's
you
this
know,
channel from Russia,
mhm.
and these are
Well,
people
there's your
that
problem.
well, um, so these people are like scientists people or
Uh-huh.
archaeology slash scientists, and they're there to like their channel is to debunk all the like what Harju's saying and stuff, like those mysteries that are unattainable. It's just
Mhm,
always perpetually a mystery and stuff. Um, so they go back to the ancient things, and so like they took a granite slab
mhm,
or some sort of like very hard rock,
mhm,
and then they showed a picture of an ancient Babylonian like mule duck thing or duck
mhm,
or whatever, and it had um like like a little top, and it was carved out, and it was like in the shape of like some duck with the wings and the beak and the whole thing, and and forever they're saying this is impossible in the lifetime of these people because they didn't have the tools and whatnot and this and that. So these Russian people go to work with like string and freaking like another
mhm.
rock, and they worked it in this video where they shaped the freaking thing, and it turned out, I would say, 85% close to what it was. It looked
Mhm.
it looked like it could have been done in that era. It had a pocket inside. It was emptied out so you
Yeah.
could put stuff in it, like the
And
whole thing.
and how long did they work on it?
I think it took them. I don't want to say, but I think it was like a month or so.
Okay. So supposing they were back in those times and they didn't have all the distractions we have now of business meetings and we got to go to this and dinner with the family and all got to drive to here and got to fly out to there and oh this is on social media and oh We want to go see this show. Suppose you're just there in
Yeah.
your hut with your fireplace, and that's all you have to do.
That's your internet.
Yeah. You know, I mean, there's a reason why they went from mud clay to fired clay was somebody got bored. There's a reason they went from fired clay to glazed fired clay because somebody got tired of tasting dirt every time they took a drink of water. There's a reason they went from that color glazed clay to discovering you can make it a different color if you throw these leaves in it while it's in the fire. It's people experimenting and trying new things to see what happened,
Yeah.
you know.
Well, no,
um
that's it. I mean, that's the reasonable thing that they were working it out and hit or miss until they got
but
something that you know.
right, but what I'm getting at is they had the time to do that because they
Yeah.
didn't have the distractions. Now, I seriously doubt they sat there for 8 hours a day doing this stuff. They probably had the time to dedicate a few hours each day,
A couple of
you know.
sacrifices in the evening.
Yeah, you know,
A
but
couple of human.
go out and um, kill a calf and put it on a rock, let the buzzards
Wasn't
have it, you
wasn't
know,
that
to
cousin
appease this
Irma?
god.
That's
Mhm,
well. But one thing. But I will say this. Even though they showed that it could be done and they did do it and they did a great
mhm.
job at it, I'm not going to sit here and lie. Um. Well, go ahead and read that.
It just Greg was just saying that it was they were that thing was made by the diamond-billed rockpecker. So that explains it all.
So even though that one piece that's kind of like, I guess
Hmm.
you'd call it like an like it's kind of like a little
Hmm.
trophy box or whatever.
Hmm.
That's one thing though.
Hmm.
I'm not down. Well, I don't know the specifics, so that's why I'm not down. But
Right.
I'm not down with those monolithic. Like there's this huge temple in
Hmm.
like, I don't know if it's, I think it's somewhere in Anatolia,
Hmm.
somewhere um Lebanon. I think it's Lebanon. Dude, there's a freaking temple where the blocks for the building are bigger than the ones by far in Egypt for the pyramids and this and that. They're
Hmm.
hundreds and hundreds of tons, huge, freaking massive, savage blocks. A guy, like a British guy, went. That's another channel. He went to visit it, and he's standing next to the freaking. Just one block
Hmm.
is like bigger than a house for a human being, and it's like they cut that and dragged it from a freaking like whatnot far away, and the pieces fit in such a way that it's like, well, what the heck is going on here? It's so mind blowing. And obviously, I don't have any answer for that. But the point is
Sure.
not that. The point is that that is on a different level than the duck thing.
Oh, sure. But the thing is, and I do kind of like that idea of it's real easy for us to sit here and say, well, they didn't have this technology, they couldn't have done it. And for these guys to turn around and say, oh, yeah, it's not 100%, but we didn't
Right.
spend that much time on it. Here it is right here. They certainly could
Right.
have done it. They
And that's what they
certainly
do.
could have done it. I
Yeah.
mean, and that's what we've talked about it before. That guy on his YouTube channel, ClickSpring, Chris, I think is his name. He's making a copy of the Antikythera device using the same tools that they have found that from around that time
Hmm.
and that he's researched in their writings of that time. So he's using their tools to prove that it can be done. Now, like for instance, he has a disc that has 32 holes in it, all around a specific circle, spaced a specific distance apart. He will make that tool and he will mark it out the ancient way, which was basically taking a piece of brass, which they had available to them, and he'll hold it over a smoker and put soot on it, and then flip it over and take the calipers that they would have used and draw in the soot the same way they would have. and then he'll come back and he'll measure off the way they would have measured it off and make his markings, and he'll take their hand drill and he'll drill a hole through it just to demonstrate that this is how long it takes and this is how they did it. Then he'll take it over to his modern milling machine and finish all the rest of the holes.
Yeah.
So he's using a combination of new technology and old technology, but he's using the old technology to demonstrate that not only could it be done, this is how it was done.
Right. Yeah.
So that's the kind of thing that I like. Because when you sit there and say, well, how could they have do this? How could they have made that this accurate this way? He's just sitting there going, well, here's how they did it. And they did it like so.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah. It's so, and we're talking about really old stuff, and well, it's all old, but if you move forward into like the Roman period, so okay, so like something as simple as a slipper or like a sandal, let's say like a flip flop.
Yeah.
You would think like, you know, we're so chic with our flip flops. You would think in general that flip flops are something within the distance of the world that we live in. Flip flops have been around forever, but that's a simple item.
Mm-hmm.
How about running water? They had running in Rome.
Mm-hmm.
They had freaking pipe works and valves.
Yeah.
You could open up a valve and
running
it would let
water in the house.
in the house. And they had, like, some houses did, like, it depended on the financial, like everything else.
Mm-hmm.
But they also had communal bathhouses that provided showers, baths with hot and cold water
Mm-hmm.
for the people that would visit. So you had hot water, and sure, it was warmed by the labor of slaves underneath.
Yeah,
hot.
stoking the fires. Yes,
but regardless, that's the point. Is that,
mm-hmm.
dude, running water back thousands of years ago?
Central heat. They would pipe hot water through troughs under the floors of their homes, and the radiant heat from that hot water coming up through the floors. You know, central heating and hot and cold running water. Yes, they had it.
I mean, that is something
Mm-hmm.
that one would think, oh, well, we're freaking doing that now, or maybe for the past 100. No, these people had it going on. That's why they call it the Dark Ages, because when Rome receded
Mm-hmm.
and Europe was left to its own devices, and that it was basically like the end of the upkeep of the things that existed as a commonplace before.
Yeah.
And so Europe went into decline, and people went into, you know, just their villages.
Yeah.
And then you had your local chieftains and local power brokers that would take control, and so it became that.
Well,
but
not only that, you had thieves running up and taking parts off of Roman roads and aqueducts and stuff like that to build a new barn over here. I mean, that's still going on in China. Only about 1/4 of the Great Wall still exists, because, I mean, villagers for hundreds of years, thousands of years now, have been stealing parts of it, just taking, because that's building material, and they don't give a damn about no Great Wall and no China. I need a new barn for my cattle over here. And I mean, a lot of that kind of stuff gets taken apart. And I mean, in Great Britain, they did it, I mean, wholesale.
Hadrian's Wall used to be more impressive than what it is.
Oh, yeah, big time. But they started needing stone to divide up the land when they started running sheep out there. And stone has to come from somewhere in great quantities. Yeah, you can walk around your field and pick up rocks, but that's only going to go so far. Why am I going to walk around this big field picking up rocks when there's this big old wall there and there ain't no Romans around to protect it?
Yeah, they're not thinking, let's conserve history.
Yeah, let's just go grab that. Let's make this wall so I can keep the neighbor's sheep out of mine.
It wasn't even a consideration. Like, it wasn't even a consideration for them in terms of, oh, let's conserve this. I mean, they even took down like people in closer to our time, late medieval and beyond, into the 1700s, more so in the 1700s. Once gunpowder became a real thing and all this and that, and it went forward, castles started to become abandoned, and,
Yeah.
some like in England, some were decommissioned and demolished. They said, let's bring it, and some
Oh,
were halfway demolished enough. So
all
they
over
weren't
Europe.
thinking, yeah, they weren't thinking preserving it until years later. Then they said, well, wait a second, this is a national treasure. And then they said, oh well, wait, let's. But
Yeah.
but
But
a lot of it,
that's still a relatively recent thought,
concept,
depending
yeah,
upon the cultures. Some cultures have been into protecting those kind of things, their history, their cultural history, for a long time. Other cultures, not so much.
yeah,
It's all about development and improvement. But it just depends. You go many places around the world and you'll find ancient temples, I mean, in Tunisia and what have you, that
yeah.
are, while they're no longer being used, they are being protected and have been protected for thousands of years.
It's
So
amazing. It really is amazing. It really is amazing to think that so long ago, and you have these. And by the way, that the bigger the, like, building or whatever, I
mhm.
guess the bigger it's built, the better of a chance apparently has to last a lot, because a lot of things that were probably more, cozy, um just went away, and we'll never know about it.
Um,
um and a lot of life and living would have happened in regular people's, you know what I'm saying, goings
yeah.
on. So we have a good amount of stuff from the
Well,
past, and it's amazing, you
and
know.
that's something I've been talking about it for a couple of months now, about the rabbit hole that I have fallen down, about people who are buying derelict farmhouses
Yeah,
and run down, some of them all the way up to nice chateaus or castles,
yeah,
all over Western Europe. Um, they're finding these old places that have just been the catchphrase is abandoned farmhouse. Well, it hasn't been abandoned. It's just, the roof caved in years ago. There was a fire or something, or somebody passed away, and it's passed down to heirs, and now they got to get rid of it to pay the taxes on it. So they sell it, and somebody else moves in and they start renovating the place. That's a fairly new thing, not 100%, but it's fairly new, and you're starting to see more and more and more of it. I mean, it's probably, I have a theory. I think all these van life people that were so hot and heavy about the van life 5 years ago got sick of it, and they want room now. So they're buying these places and fixing them up with all
yeah,
the money they made in the van life because they weren't paying a mortgage.
yeah,
So, but you're seeing it more and more and more often. And we're talking houses from the 1700s up into the early 1900s that have just fallen into disrepair. They're being completely renovated, from top to bottom. I mean, going so far as to rip out old floors and everything, pour slabs, and just, build from the foundation up, rebuild from the foundation up. And it's fascinating to me to see. And it's real encouraging for me to see, because I think I'm kind of like you in that I like old historic buildings. And I especially like to see people take care of old
yeah,
historic buildings.
yeah. There's something very neat about, yeah,
And I'm fascinated by the building methods that they used for, I mean, up to and including 300-400 years ago
it
in
was
some of these
rock. At
places.
least in Spain, it was like the buildings
Yeah,
were like just
all over,
rock.
all over, Spain, Portugal, France, Germany, Belgium. It was rock until man-made brick started coming into play. And, they're just going through the entire thing and just rebuilding it using the same earth and clay. Sometimes they'll use a lime mortar, but more often than not, these people just strained out the clay from the soil, separated it through various different water baths, and used that as a mortar between the rocks. And these people are building them back up. Sometimes it was just tamped earth. Sometimes it was wattle and daub. You build a wood frame and you weave a bunch of branches in there, and you just start packing clay over that, and that's your house. Just some of the building methods are fascinating to me. And it's like we look at stuff like that today and say, oh man, that would never be up to code. How the heck do they expect it to last that long? Dude, the place
It
is
did.
100 years old, you know?
Well, the town, so there's a place called Santillana del Mar,
Hmm.
and that town is where my great grand uncle was a priest. He was given the place from the Pope. I think it was Pope. I don't know which one because I'm not into the whole Pope thing, but he was granted that as his place, and it's from the 1100s.
Hmm.
The town,
Hmm.
and it started as a monk settlement
Hmm.
back
Monastery,
then.
yeah.
And if you see pictures of the place, it looks like a medieval movie. All the buildings are rock, and
Hmm.
the cathedral, or whatever you want to call it, it's like huge. It's got an archway entrance, and it's just medieval whatnot. It was his last appointment, um, and but on the same, there's lots of little towns like that in the north of
Yeah.
Spain or throughout Spain, but in the north of Spain, it's like that. And the town in which not so in the town in which my grandfather's mother was born is a place in the mountains further to the south. Um, and today there may be 4 or 5 people that live in that town because what's ended, and they're all like what you're saying, like that rock.
Hmm.
The thing is that back then there were plenty of people living in those towns, but because of the economy,
Hmm.
you're living in the mountains, and so what ends up happening is that all the people have left to the big cities. So now you have old retirees living in these towns in the
Yeah.
middle of the mountains, where you might have a handful, and then they have buses that
Uh-huh.
come and pick them up, and they'll take them to a town so they could do their purchases, and then the bus will drive them back,
Right.
and so they have services like that. But these towns are now
Well,
less populated, and so and people buy from other parts of Europe. People come and buy it
yeah.
and go in, and will start to restore. So you
Hmm.
see so there's all these things happening, but you can't, without access to goods and services in the middle
Hmm.
of the mountain. That's not for everybody, but the
No,
town still exists. It's just that now it's not occupied.
but with the advent of work from home, there are a lot of people moving out to these places who don't have a problem with going into town every 2 weeks, once every 2 weeks, because they can work from home. They no longer have to commute. They commute via the internet. And so there are, I mean, I'm seeing that all over the place. I just found and have been binge watching this couple in Austria who bought this little bitty farmhouse, demolished probably half of it because it was an addition that was done in like the 1920s and it was made of wood. Well, they demolished that addition and they're renovating the original uh, stone house. And that stuff is just fascinating to me, and I like to see it. I like to see both the big castles and everything get restored, but I also like to see the small, humble farmhouses get restored. And you can trace somebody's rise and fall in stature or status just by looking at the house because at first they were all rock, but then as a person got a little bit more money, they started putting plaster on the outside of the house so it was nice and smooth and then
Yeah,
painted. And then, a couple of hundred years go by or a couple of generations go by and the plaster's cracking and starting to fall off here because they don't have the money to maintain it. And then next thing you know, it's half fallen off and the roof is caved in on one side. And they've moved into the city to get a job at this factory and they don't give a damn about the farmhouse anymore.
yeah, they're on another um, mindset.
Yeah.
It takes people like that are
Hmm.
conscientious towards what you're explaining. We need people like we need the other people that you're saying that come in and don't give a crap. We actually need those I don't
Yeah,
give a crap people because they're doing stuff for. But we also need the other type of people, you
yeah.
know.
Well, we need everybody. We need all types of people. We need
Yeah,
people that give a damn. Jim Dockrell says people worked hard here for years so they could afford higher education for their kids, so they wouldn't have to work so hard. Also, they succeeded. The kids left, didn't come back. That is true. And now the town has all kinds of jobs not being filled. Absolutely.
it sounds similar to what we were talking about.
Yeah.
Actually, it sounds exactly the same.
This area here is a microcosm of that. You know, the kids get raised and they go off, they leave the valley and they go see the world, go seek their fortune and this, that, and the other. And so it's parents and grandparents here. Some come back, most don't, because there's no real big industry here. There's nothing, there's no tech industry. Most of the people, the number one group here of employment is the medical service. And most of those are catering to the parents that those kids left behind, you know. So to see folks actually give a damn, to watch, and you can find them on YouTube. You can find a bunch of young farmers who have worked the farm their whole lives, graduated high school, went off to college, studied agriculture, modern agriculture, and came back and are building these farms up better and teaching their parents new ways of farming, the new methods, you know, bigger machines, better machines, lower reliance on chemicals and what have you, and better crops. That is cool as well. I
Yeah,
mean,
some people come back with the tools that they. But you know, it is so. Look, that's as normal as can be because you have the whole history of the United States is literally people leaving the old and never coming back for
right.
or you know there were I guess many people that did, but you get the point. It's people that left, and then people here decided to move further west, and so it's and then some of the people further west said, you know what, I like it back. Let's
Yeah.
go try our luck back east, and so it's
Yeah.
always a ping pong, going back and forth, and humans are like that. But thank goodness that there are individual, like it's born in you, right? Like if you're into repairing stuff, like the French, like chateaus and whatnot, it's something that's born in you. Like not everybody, if it's your gift or your feeling to proceed in. So we need all these type of different attitudes and
Yes.
whatnot.
We do. We need those kind of attitudes, and that's why a couple of weeks ago I referred to this as generation renovation or generation restoration, because I'm very encouraged by the number of young people, and I'm talking about some of these people are in their early 20s. Some of them are in their 30s. There's one couple in Belgium. He's 41. She's like 37 or 38, and they're rebuilding an old farmhouse, and they're, I would say, roughly about halfway done, you know. And this place has been just sitting there going to rot for 20 years. And finally the estate decided, yeah, this place is just a burden, let's go ahead and sell it off, we're not going to do anything with it. So they bought it a couple of years ago and they've been rebuilding it ever since. And but overwhelmingly, if you look at these channels on YouTube that I'm seeing, and there's a bunch of them out there are hundreds of these channels out there, it's predominantly younger people, young couples
They
who,
have the energy.
they're, well, not only that, they're taking a chance. They know that they can't buy a nice house, but they can buy one that needs work and they can make it a nice house for less than they could buy a nice house, because some of these places are selling for criminally cheap prices because nobody wants them. And
Yes.
so they're willing to put in the sweat equity. And as they get popular, you know, they start getting sponsorships and this, that, and the other, and tool companies help them out and what have you, which is a major, major benefit to them. but they're actually getting it done. And several couples have moved into the places while they're still renovating, other floors or other rooms or what have you. And it's encouraging to see people wanting to take care of older stuff and bring it back to its past glory. I mean,
Now,
I'm a big fan.
on the heels of that, I'll just say just a couple of last things. I just want to say this one thing. I don't know. I think that we're at the tail end of this, but
Uh-huh.
I do want to say this is kind of off to the side, but um, with all that in mind,
Hmm.
I would not be opposed to people in order to repopulate these treasures of humanity and for other good reasons. I'm not one opposed to the concept of families having a lot of kids, like a re as opposed to the minimization that's going on. I'm kind of thinking, like where it's like one kid or two kids or whatever. I'm kind of thinking to myself, I mean, there's a financial burden as well considering, but freaking having like repopulating,
Yeah.
let's get it going.
Yeah.
That's easier
Yeah.
said than
I
done, but
mean,
that's
well, I mean, it all depends on what you want to do because, back when, in the case of my great great grandparents, rather, they were subsistence farmers
yeah,
and kids were free labor.
yeah,
You went to school to the sixth grade, and that was good enough. You can read and write, you can do basic math. That's good enough. Get your butt out here in the fields and get to work. And
yeah.
it was free labor, and it was just as easy to feed six kids as it was to feed three or four. It was just a couple extra pork chops, and here we go. You know,
So this is I'll leave this idea that now this is gonna sound, it might sound weird because it comes from left field, but it's true and verifiable, and I've got all the documents, so I'm not even, and there's no need to exaggerate stuff. So my ancestors in particular from this part of northern Spain I'm talking about, although I have ancestors from the southern part of Spain which has a different story, and from the Canary Islands which have a different story, although
sure.
they're part of the same sort of like magnet group,
Opera.
let's say. Yeah, but they were distinct in certain ways as well. Um, all the people from the north of Spain, and when I say all, let's not use the word all. Let's say most people
Hmm.
were, or many of the people were subsistent farmers. They did with the cattle. They did
Hmm.
with whatever crops that they were doing. Like that's the
Yeah.
story. This is how they survived and stuff. But here's a cool thing, and this is like not even a doubt. Most people, to one degree, and there's a reason for it, in the north of Spain, most were noble people
Hmm.
attached to the nobility on paper, but
Hmm.
yet they were poor as hell because there
Yeah.
you had your higher nobles, um, and so some would not pay certain taxes, and they had their privileges, um, and so that's an interesting thing. So they had a title because everybody from the north, what it was there was a whole conflict that happened with the warring factions in the north that developed into, and lands were granted, and battle. There's a whole story, but you could be completely dead poor in this part of the world during that time, and yet have a title of nobility. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So you have these two things, which I find an incredible, like
Oh yeah.
juxtaposed
Well,
situation.
that's actually very common, and it's still happening today in the UK. You have a lot of people who have inherited the title of their father. They've got no way to support the house. They got no way to support the number of employees it takes to run the house.
Yeah,
They end up opening the house to the public for tours or for overnight stays or what have you, not exactly a hotel or a B&B, but very close to it, as a way to keep the lights turned on and the refrigerators full. That's
yeah.
actually pretty common.
There's people in France. I saw a whole thing about that, um, where France does not. France did away with their royal
Yeah.
thing a long time ago, and Spain did too. By the way, Spain did too for the population at large. I think it was sometime in the 1800s. I don't know the date, but there was a point in which they said it ends here, and people are like, "Oh well, crap." But there are certain titles that still, like, there's
Exist, yeah.
yeah. So there's still, you have your upper echelon, but like for the other other groups, it was done, and
Yeah.
so like people were like, "Oh well, crap," because there was taxes you could avoid. There was all sorts of benefits,
Mhm.
even though you weren't financially, you had benefits to escape certain problems.
Yeah.
Um, Next, like your neighbor could maybe not have that title, you were given preferential, like a lot of things like that. Well, in France, there's still like a society where they keep track,
Hmm.
and so they still hold on to, oh well, this is the, so they still have that, but the state itself has done away with that kind of concept and stuff,
Yeah.
even though Spain does have their monarch. But it's
Hmm.
kind of like England, it's kind of like England,
Hmm.
in terms of they have their royal.
It's a
But
title only, but that's all.
yeah, well, their king, or Spain's king, would be the equivalent of the king now of England.
Hmm.
So they do have like a palace and this and that, but the echelons going down, um, for the majority of the people that did have, it's kind of like,
Yeah.
sorry,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
and they did enjoy certain, even though they didn't have the money, they did enjoy certain benefits and stuff. So
Well, just to finish up here, Jim says, that's how I bought this place so cheap. The congregation's kids all left.
uh-huh.
You would you would have to be over 500,000 to take it from me now. Oh, there you go. It's starting to make money now. Well, providing an income would be more accurate. But hey, if you're happy doing it, Jim, then that's what's important, because you are preserving a piece of history, as recent or as ancient as it may be. But you are preserving a piece of history. And I've seen some of the work that you've done on the place. You're bringing it back up. So more power to you, my friend. I'm your biggest cheerleader, other than the guy you're buying all your materials from. He's your biggest cheerleader. He wants you to keep going. You sure you like that paint? Come get some more.
All right, so are you ready to land
Yeah,
it?
I'm ready to land it.
Okay, so listen, folks, we hope you enjoyed it. Um, I would say, ain't it great? We're heading into winter, but it's so hot here that I can't even say that properly, because I'd be lying to myself. But for all you, well, you guys might not be happy about it too, because it gets pretty severe. Um,
It was 28 degrees this morning when I went out to the shop.
Damn, dude. But you know what though, dude? You know what? I'm sorry, dude, but hot weather is so muggy and thick and like oppressive.
You
You
would
want
die in 28 degrees.
Well, remember, I spent a few weeks in Chicago in November, and you want to know something though? For a Florida guy being in that kind of weather, and it was freaking cold and
Yeah.
windy cold.
Yeah.
Um,
Chicago gets cold. That's all. Yeah. No argument.
I felt when I would go out to transition from your hotel room to the next thing,
Mhm.
anytime you'd have to go out into the outside, it almost felt like I, I was like visiting the moon or some sort of like, everything felt like you're but and Chicago, walking the streets and people were bundled up and stuff, and I liked it, but like, when you're out, you got to get to where you're going. You're not in
Yeah.
Miami, you're strolling along.
Yeah. Ain't no strolling in Chicago.
No, there's no stroll. It's like, you got to get there. Let's go.
Hmm.
Here it's more like you'll stop for a bit under a tree. Well, you have to because it's freaking hot. But um, so I found that weird. But I like the cold weather. I don't know if I'd like it perpetually, but anyways, um, we want to thank you guys. We hope that you're enjoying your week, and we want you to be happy and have as great a time throughout the week and be safe. We go live every Tuesday at 9:30 Eastern, 6:30 Pacific, here on the YouTube channel Trampled Underfoot Podcast, and we also have
A website, TrampledUnderfootPodcast.com. Stop on in, say hello. or don't say hello. Just click the Wayback Machine button, check out our past audio episodes, download them to your podcatcher, and we can never speak of this again. Nobody will ever know you're there. Take only memories, leave only footprints. That's
Yeah.
Trampled Underfoot Podcast.com.
Awesome. All right. Well, I enjoyed it. We pulled that one out out of our
Our
hat.
tail end, yeah.
We want to thank you guys. Enjoy yourselves, and there might be an after show party somewhere in the interwebs that only a few select have access to. I'll just say that.
Yeah.
Maybe, maybe not.
Yeah.
All right. Peace.
Peace.
Oh, I took yours this time.
Yeah, well,
I
that's
say
all right.
see ya. No, you say
You say
see ya.
what you say whatever you want.
Do you usually say see ya